Howdy, Immortalium here. Today I'm reviewing Sakuran, a pretty interesting manga. Basically, it's set during Edo period Japan, and we follow the lead character, Kyoha, from childhood when she's sold into a brothel or pleasure quarter, up to when she starts to work. And it's a pretty good manga, in particular for historical purposes. You get to find out how these children were actually trained. Like, for instance, the fact that they were assigned to a courtesan, who they call Oiran, which meant elder sister, and they basically had to learn, you know, how to entertain the guests, how to then, you know, perform their tasks, etc., etc. So from a historical perspective, it's great. From a story perspective, I think it could have been handled a little better. So I'll just explain what I mean by that. Basically, first chapter in this book is going to be a bit confusing. Why? Because of the fact it's set after the rest of the story. So if it's kind of like an epilogue before you've actually read the story, which is a bit strange. I don't know. It was an odd way to begin it, and it had me a bit confused. The second chapter onwards then starts from a chronological perspective. It starts off with her as a child being sold into the pleasure quarter and being assigned to an Oiran, etc., etc. And from there it progresses. Now, considering that this series is, you know, set in a pleasure quarter or a brothel, it's no surprise that it's, you know, has strong sexual content. But what surprise, you know, I was able to handle that pretty good. What I wasn't expecting was actually if you have a trouble with like violence towards children, you might have a bit of awkwardness with this, because basically if the children kind of act out of place, they get the crap beaten out of them. Like, it's quite uncomfortable. I actually found that more uncomfortable than the actual sexual content, so just a warning. Now, from a story perspective, the majority of it is her learning how to become a courtesan. Now, one particular story aspect that I didn't particularly like was nearer the end of the story, a romantic element is kind of put into play. And I guess it was important from a kind of historical perspective to show how these courtesans dealt with romance, considering their profession. But I thought the story itself was a little underdeveloped. Like, we didn't know anything, like, really, or like motivation or personality or anything about the one she was interested in. So I just found that a bit weak in comparison to the rest of the story. Overall, it's a good story. I would recommend it. It earns its 18s quite well for its sexual content and violence towards children. From an artistic perspective, it's a very nice looking series. It's basically, there's a lot of background details, and a lot of details, of course, with the clothing, as you would expect. If you want to see an example of the art style, obviously a lot of use of whites, but I really like the level of details in the backgrounds and clothing and everything. So it's a very nice looking series. Because of the fact that the majority of this is kind of a flashback, you'll notice that there's a lot of blacks on the page, which, you know, in manga generally indicates a flashback, but that's throughout the entire book, basically. Only the first chapter is not in blacks, for obvious reason. After that, the other thing to talk about this series is Vertical's treatment of it. It's a bit odd. I don't know. First of all, to explain, this is a seinen manga. Originally, when I bought it, I thought it was a josei. I don't know why, I just did. When I was looking in, you know, like, in which magazine was published in, yeah, it was published in the seinen magazine Evening, which I was already aware of. Well, like, I knew what Evening was, so I immediately knew, oh wait, this must be a seinen then, and I looked up and it was. So it's not a josei, if any of you think it is a josei. So it's interesting to see how Vertical then handled this in comparison to other seinen works. For one, it's not flopped. It's, you know, from right to left, which, you know, I appreciate. Next, they gave a kind of a shiny cover, not only to the front, but also to the back. Now, I'm not sure why they did that. The only other manga that I knew had like this kind of shiny effect was the first 3 volumes of Fullmetal Alchemist. But there kind of made sense because, you know, it was to give the sense of metal. I don't know, maybe the reason for the shininess is just to convey the extravagance, or, you know, of their lifestyle and all that, with all these shiny jewelry and everything. The other thing to say is that out of all the vertical manga I have, this is actually the smallest. Now, from what I've seen online, I'm thinking from a trim size perspective, it's probably similar to Flowers of Evil or The Limit or something like that, but I don't have any of those. I mainly have, you know, like, you know, Tezuka and Sen Works and classic manga. So the other smallest ones, let's just take, I did a review on this previously, Utsubora, which, if you compare the trim size, that's the comparison there. It is smaller. Now, not a ton smaller, as you can see, but it is small, which is a bit odd, so I'm not sure why they made it that small. It's 300 pages, so it's a nice, thick little book. It's all one volume, if, you know, you were wondering. It's not like you have to get a second volume of this. And the other thing to point out as well is Vertical actually did a lot of color pages. Basically, like, I'd say about half of the chapters in here have color pages. There's a ton of them. Now, generally the way it works is that the first page, you know, of the chapter will be in color, then you have the title page, you have another color page after that, and that's it. But there's like at least 5 of them, if not more, so there's actually a lot of color pages, and they're very well done color pages. So, I commend Vertical on that. So it's a very nicely presented book. The only odd factor being, you know, the very small trim size. I'm not sure why. So overall, this is a good series. I would recommend it, but I thought it could have been handled a little better, in my personal opinion. That doesn't mean that it's a bad series, though. It's still a very good series. I would still recommend it, particularly for its historical aspect. You get to understand how these courtesans were trained and how they were to entertain guests. It's quite interesting. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and bye-bye.